Welcome, everybody. My name is Andrew Johnson. I am the chair today for our Committee of the Whole meeting, our regularly scheduled meeting for February 8th. We are joined today by council members Gordon, Cano, Bender, Quincy, Fry, Goodman, and Palmisano. We are a quorum of the committee. The chair today, Council Vice President Glidden, is at the state capitol working on behalf of the city and in the city's interests on the local interference bill on preemption. So that's why she's unable to join us today. We have 4 items on our agenda. Due to a clerical error, the item number 1 is actually a consent item, and so that's how we'll handle that. And then we also have 1 walk-on item that we'll handle as consent, which is a staff direction that you all have related to Workers' Day at City Hall. And then we have 2 other items for discussion, the Transgender Equity Council resolution and the 2016 resident survey. So we will first take up our 2 consent items. Does anyone have any discussion on those items? Councilmember Bender.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just clarifying, the consent now includes the Workers' Day staff direction. That's
yes.
Item number 2. I'd just like to briefly speak on that.
Please do.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Everyone has in front of them the staff direction, which is directing staff in multiple departments to help organize a pilot Workers' Day at City Hall. This will be modeled after a business day, and I've had a chance to speak with most of you about this. We've been meeting with some folks from organized labor and other organizations that work with workers to plan a day that would invite workers to come to City Hall, anyone who identifies as a worker or working person. And we've helped with that group and staff identify 4 topics that we would try for this year to be breakout sessions. 1 about workplace regulations like minimum wage and paid sick time, 1 about housing, public health and community safety, and then finally participatory budgeting. And I would invite any council members who want to get more involved in the planning of this to jump in. But so I'll move that staff direction, and I could answer any questions now or later. And just to note, we've been working with primarily the coordinator's office, but each of the departments that is sort of most related to these items are also engaged. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember Bender. I'm not seeing, Councilmember Fry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just briefly, I think this is a great idea. I think the suggestion to have workers in where it's not in adversarial fashion, but it's working collaboratively, I think is the right plan. And thank you to the staff direction.
Not seeing any additional discussion. So on those 2 consent items, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Not seeing any of the motions or the consent items are passed. I also want to recognize that Council Member Reich has joined us, and we are now moving on to discussion item on Transgender Equity Council. And for this, we will have Nuria please come and join us and speak to the item.
Good morning. My name is Nuria Rivera-Vandermeide. I'm the Deputy City Coordinator for the City of Minneapolis, and I'm here with a brief but really important request for council action to really move forward some work that has already been previously approved and done by both council, by mayor, and by the Transgender Issues Work Group. As you know, the Transgender Issue Work Group was created in 2014. There was a resolution passed by City Council in May of 2016 that supported further efforts as that moved forward, but importantly supported the creation of a permanent advisory committee. And that is the committee that is moving forward today before you in the resolution that really establishes and creates an advisory body on transgender issues for those and serve as a bridge for the transgender and gender nonconforming community. I'm going to step out for a moment and invite Philippe Cunningham, who has been the chair of the Trans Issues Work Group, to speak briefly on the topic and can stand for questions afterwards.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, good morning. As the chair of the Trans Issues Work Group, I'm here to say a few words about this resolution. We are seeking to launch a new city committee, the Transgender Equity Council. The creation of this committee demonstrates the City of Minneapolis's commitment to support and uplift the transgender community and gender nonconforming Minneapolitans by bringing us to the table. This committee will also institutionalize transgender equity as a priority for the city. This committee is the result of over 3 years of dedicated work from members of the Trans Issues Work Group, which is a coalition of over 30 city employees and who work in partnership with community organizations, the park board, and the county. Last summer, as Nuria mentioned, the council passed the Transgender Equity Resolution, and which was a declaration of support from City Hall for the transgender community during the midst of rampant so-called bathroom bills targeting transgender people. And as a transgender Minneapolitan, I want to say thank you again for your bold stance of support. Included in that resolution was the exploration of creating a new permanent city committee. The Transgender Equity Council will create space for the trans and gender nonconforming members of our community to have a voice in the decision-making process. The transgender community will be able to work hand in hand with the city for us to overcome the unique challenges that we face. Briefly, the structure of the committee, there will be 15 members, 8 trans and gender nonconforming community members, 2 of which will be mayoral appointees, and the other 6 will be council appointees. 4 City of Minneapolis employees and a representative from each of our public partners, so the park board, the county, and now MPS as well. The structure and the committee charter was developed based on input and feedback from the Trans Issues Work Group at large. What we have here is truly groundbreaking. This resolution centers and builds up the voice of a community that has gone long unheard. This resolution, our voice will be centered in a way that is nearly unmatched in any other municipal government in our country. So on behalf of the Trans Issues Work Group, thank you for your consideration of this resolution.
Thank you. All right. Well, any discussion? Any discussion? Not seeing any, I will just wanted to say thank you to our staff and to especially all the members of the work group for their work over these years. And it's exciting to see this formalized and institutionalized in our city. So thank you very much for your work on this. I look forward to all the great work to come as well. With that, let's take a vote on this resolution. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed? The resolution passes. Thank you. Moving on, we have our discussion on the 2016 resident survey. And with us today, all right, please come.
Good morning, Chair Johnson and committee members. My name is Donald Joseph. I'm the Deputy Director for the Neighborhood and Community Relations Department, and I am here to present the 2016 resident survey. I will be co-presenting the survey with Nicole Rogers and Stephanie Peterson from Wilder Research. This is being presented as a receive and file action for the committee. So the 2016 resident survey is an engagement opportunity that that assesses residents' opinions, perspectives, their priorities, and their satisfaction, if you will, regarding city government services and our progress towards our stated city goals. The resident survey has been completed every 2 years since 2001. Preceding this presentation today, some elected officials, city departments met for the city roundtable discussion on Wednesday, December 14th, which was a pretty robust conversation. As the some of the resident survey questions are actually some of our community indicators. So we were able to have a really robust conversation regarding those things that the results team is actually mandated to report on. So for the 2016 resident survey, we implemented a number of changes. We worked directly with city departments to revisit the questions that we were asking residents. Were they meaningful? Were they relevant to city department programs, processes, whether that it was their programmatic or budgeting processes? We also redesigned the 2016 resident survey from previous versions to be more inclusive of underrepresented communities. And we were intentional about making the questions easy. We wanted the questions to be, we wanted the survey rather to be easy to fill out. We wanted the questions to be understood easily. We wanted to dramatically reduce the amount of time one needed to complete the survey. So for 2016, we were able to reduce that from, at a minimum, 45 minutes to 20 minutes. When we received the initial results from the survey, we saw that there were some communities that actually that had lower participation rates versus others. So Wilder actually looked at those communities that specifically at the time were near North, Phillips, and also University, and did additional outreach to drive participation rates in those areas, which worked out very well, which Stephanie and Nicole will take you through in more detail. I would be remiss to not mention that the data in the 2016 resident survey actually suggested that there may be a digital divide in some of the communities that we serve. When you consider that near North, Camden, and also Phillips, because we had a multi-pronged strategy in terms of how we disseminated the survey, we found that residents in those aforementioned communities actually completed their surveys using the papered method, because we did disseminate the survey online over the phone, where we were also sensitive to our Somali and Hmong and Spanish-speaking residents. So we found in these communities that they actually completed more of those mail-in surveys versus going online, which we thought was significant, considering that it confirmed that the multi-pronged strategy of engaging all residents seemed to be effective, and possibly also set a template, if you will, for future engagement for the city going forward. So without further ado, I'd like to pass it off to Nicole, who will take you through more of the nuances of the survey results.
All right, welcome, Nicole.
Good morning, Chair Johnson and council members. I'm happy to be here. My name is Nicole Martin Rogers. I'm a senior research manager at Wilder Research. Wilder Research is a nonprofit organization. We're a division of Wilder Foundation, which is an operating foundation that provides a lot of different kinds of direct services, mostly in the East Metro. Wilder Research's service area is broader. We do most of our work in the state of Minnesota. We do program evaluation and community-based research to help understand community members' experiences and needs, trends over time, and the impact of various initiatives and programs. And we're glad to be here this morning to talk with you about the results of the survey. We were happy to be able to be a part of this process to help you collect some data from residents of the city, and also to help you use that data to inform your decision-making processes. So before I get into the methods, I just want to reiterate what Donald Joseph said about the redesign of the survey. So in addition to changing the methods of sampling and things, we also changed the survey instrument substantially from previous years. So we worked with all of the city departments and many of you all as well to make sure that the questions that we are asking on the survey are directly relevant to items that would be actionable by the city departments, as well as things that are relevant to your city goals and strategic directions. So in terms of the survey methods, I'm going to just talk briefly about that and the survey respondents, and then I'll turn it over to my colleague to talk about the key findings. So we wanted to make sure that we had a representative sample of the entire city of Minneapolis. So in order to do that, we selected a random sample of addresses across the city. This is a common practice of random sampling in order to represent a whole population. You can think of it kind of like a biologist might take a couple samples from a river in different places to understand the health of the whole river. They don't need to actually measure every single molecule in the water to understand what's happening because they took a scientific sample. That's what we did with the population of Minneapolis. We drew a scientific sample from each of the different communities to ensure statistical representation of the population. And as Donald Joseph mentioned, we mailed the survey. First, we mailed invitations to a web link to the survey, and then at the third mailing, we also sent a full survey packet with a paper survey that residents could fill out in case they didn't have access to the internet. In all of those mailings, we also had phone numbers and information for how residents who didn't speak English or other residents who had disabilities or might otherwise prefer to complete the survey over the phone could contact us to do that. So we used an address-based sample. That means that every address in Minneapolis had an equal chance of being selected to be a part of the survey. This is different from previous years where your resident survey used a landline and cell phone sampling methodology. So because we used an address-based sample and also because we had options to fill out the survey online, on paper, and by phone, this makes the survey more accessible and inclusive than in previous years. Want to point out that the margin of error for this survey meets the common standard in survey research. We're below plus or minus 5% margin of error at the city overall results. And within each of the communities, the results are under plus or minus 10%. So they're statistically representative both at the city and for each of the 11 communities. And last, I just wanted to mention that the survey data were weighted, which means that they were adjusted based on certain characteristics in the population to make sure that the survey data are representative of the population in the end, because certain groups of people are more or less likely to respond to surveys. So then we adjust the survey based on adjust the data based on those demographic characteristics to make sure that the ultimate data set that we have is representative. This map shows how many completed surveys we received by community, and we did send out 1,000 surveys in each community. Our goal was to get at least 100 completed surveys per community, and you can see that we far exceeded our goal in every area. So, and as Donald Joseph mentioned, we did do some additional outreach to encourage and increase participation in communities that initially had a lower response rate after the mailing sequence. That included near North Phillips and University. And our bilingual staff contacted people by phone and at their address and invited them to participate in the survey. These were still focusing on the sampled addresses, and we provided language support for residents who needed help, who weren't able to fill out the survey in English. So we received 2,320 surveys from residents in Minneapolis, which is much higher than our targeted 1,100. And again, I just want to reiterate that even though there's a different response rate by community, we did weight the data overall for the city. So when you look at the city results overall, we're not overrepresenting these communities that had a higher response rate because we did weight the data. So just a little bit more about who the survey respondents are. We asked about respondents' race, ethnicity in two ways. First, we asked, as you see below, using census categories, and that's basically to allow us to compare the survey respondents to the population overall, which is from the Census Bureau data. And then we also asked a different race, ethnicity question, with many more specific, detailed categories and also more options for people to self-identify. So if you do want more information about more detailed information about the residents' cultural or ethnic background, you can look at the data book and it will show you much more detail than this. But here, the point here is just to show that the weighted sample compares very well to the city overall in terms of the race, ethnicity of the survey respondents. And I also should note here that we did hear from more younger adults in this round of the survey, again, probably because of the method that we used of having an online option and a paper option versus only a 45-minute phone survey, which many young adults aren't going to be able to participate in because of their busy life and just unwillingness to answer the phone and sit on it for 45 minutes. So that's one demographic group that's typically very underrepresented in surveys like this, and we did a better job of representing them here. So before I turn it over to Stephanie, I just wanted to make sure that you all know about the deliverables or the products that we made available from the survey that can be useful to you all. The first thing is the report, which you have in front of you and in your packets, and the executive summary that's embedded in the report. It can also be used as a standalone document. These highlight the notable findings and differences in results across the communities and across demographic groups, and they really go over all the different key areas of the survey. So this could be a great thing for you all to read or to share with other constituents who want to get a deeper understanding across, again, all the issues that we covered in the survey. Next, we also have fact sheets. You have an example in front of you from the city overall. We also have a fact sheet that's similar to that for each of the 11 communities. And this highlights results from just specific questions in the survey And it can be helpful to address issues with more general audiences, neighborhood organizations or other groups like that might appreciate having just a one-page, really high-level overview of some of the key results. And finally, I want to mention the data book, and this is probably, I think, the most useful product for many of you, and also, the city coordinator's office has been probably most excited about this product. This is the data book contains the tables for every question in the survey, broken out by community as well as by detailed demographic group. So, for example, if you wanted to look and see for a specific community what their answer was to one question, you can look in the data book, and Stephanie will show you some examples of how we think you might be able to use this, but really it's most useful, for planning programs or department level planning or decision making, as well as over time, it can be used to assess progress on the city goals and strategic directions for the questions that we asked in those areas. And so now I'd like to turn over to my colleague Stephanie to tell you about the key findings from the study.
Excellent. Welcome, Stephanie.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair Johnson, the rest of the council. My name is Stephanie Peterson, and I am a research associate with Wilder Research. It's based in St. Paul. So as was mentioned a few times earlier in this presentation, we made some substantial changes to the questions in the 2016 survey. However, we also made a deliberate effort to keep some questions so that we would be able to compare to previous iterations of the Minneapolis survey, as well as provide some comparisons to other cities and benchmark Minneapolis to other cities in the country. When looking at the citywide results in these broad areas that we're able to compare in terms of quality of life, perceptions of neighborhood quality, and overall satisfaction with city services, we found that there weren't any substantial differences between results at the citywide level in the 2016 survey versus the earlier iterations of the survey. We also found this we were able to find provide some benchmark comparison data from the National Research Center. That is the previous vendor of the Minneapolis survey. They also specialize in similar city quality surveys in a number of cities across the country. So they were able to provide us with some benchmark data. Again, in these very broad categories across the citywide level. Again, the NRC was able to tell us that Minneapolis rated similarly to benchmark cities in terms of overall quality of life, perception of neighborhood quality, and overall satisfaction with city services. On the citywide level, you may wonder if these responses are similar, if we benchmark similarly to other cities, if the overall results are comparable or similar to previous years of the survey, where the value might be in the 2016 survey. And from what we were able to determine, there are 2 points that we'd like to emphasize on that point. The first is that overall, as with many assessments and many metrics of the metro area, of the state overall, when you look broadly, Minneapolis is a great place to live, work, and play. However, we were able to see some substantial differences when we broke down these results by residential community and also by demographic group. So I'll highlight some of those differences in the rest of this presentation. So there is one story that you can kind of see when you're able to look more deeply at the results by group. The other point that I'd like to emphasize is that with the changes in the survey for the 2016 version, we're able now moving forward to have a more robust comparison to this survey as, say, a baseline for future surveys, now that we have a core set of questions that are deeply relevant to the city of Minneapolis and to the city government goals and strategic directions. So what I'll be presenting now is a high-level summary of some of the key findings in the report. This is not a complete reporting of what is covered in the report. These are just some of the differences that we would like to highlight and show as notable findings that we found. Just to show some reporting differences between groups in this presentation and in the report, we showed a graph or chart where there was a substantial difference between a particular group, be a particular community or a demographic group, and the overall City of Minneapolis result. And we defined a substantial difference as one of 20 percentage points or more between a particular group and the city overall. Within the report, we also noted in the text where one group was somewhat more or less likely to show a result, and that somewhat more or less likely represented a difference of between 10 and 19 percentage points between that group and the city overall. So first I'll talk about the overall quality of life in the city of Minneapolis. What we found at the citywide level is that most respondents gave the city positive ratings as far as being a good place to live with access to cultural amenities, farmers markets, parks, those sorts of things. As I mentioned earlier, this is consistent with trend data from previous years and consistent with the benchmarking that we were able to compare with other cities. We did find some differences, like I mentioned, when comparing data across communities and demographic groups. So this is one example. So the title of the slide is the question, overall, how would you rate the city of Minneapolis as a place to live? And this chart breaks down by residential community. You can see with the green and orange parts of the bars, so to the right-hand side, that's the proportion of residents who gave lower ratings overall, who rated the city as a fair or poor place to live. You can see in particular communities, for example, Camden, Near North, and Phillips, those three communities had higher proportions of residents who gave the city lower ratings. This slide is the same question now broken out by respondent demographic groups, so by respondents' reported race and ethnicity and their household income for the previous year, 2015. The top bar you can see is the city of Minneapolis overall. It's the same as the previous slide, but you can see from this slide that respondents from communities of color, respondents whose households earned less than $35,000, again with those green and orange bars, were more likely to give lower ratings to the quality of living in Minneapolis overall. Next, we'll talk about the neighborhood experience. We had a series of